Good afternoon. Appreciate you taking some time out to listen to me here. So I am going to talk about a couple of different things. And one of these is going to be around this construct, as Greg said, of using mobile devices and mobile advertising to understand who visited your store, your location. And that's a case study I'm going to step you through, real data from a big customer of ours. And then secondarily, I'm going to talk about the really interesting piece of this, which is all the exhaust data that this creates. So now you can start to understand, yeah, people came to my store, but where were they before they came to my store? Where have they come from? What kind of people? How does that change, et cetera? So this sort of derivative of mobile advertising is all of this data that can be incredibly powerful if you're thinking about in-store. And then the third piece is if you take this construct of in-store marketing, in-store location, and you meld it with all this other data, what does that open up in terms of an opportunity? So I will try my best to make it interesting and informative and stay on time, and then we're going to have a pretty interesting panel that I think will dovetail really well with this. So as you saw, so I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called PlaceIQ. We've been around coming off about 4 years now, about 65, 70 people based in New York, and we really are an audience company. I used to say this when I was out pitching for seed money, and people would sort of like, no, you're not an audience company, right? It's far too broad. And so we used to call ourselves different things. But we set out with a mission, and the mission was really to say, hey, we think we have a new way to understand how consumers behave, and it's using location as one of the core principles. So we're really all about understanding audiences, understanding data. I'm not going to give you a pitch at all on the company, but I think it's important you understand our fundamental construct of how we think about the world, because that's going to sort of support the rest of this. So for you to say here, so what is PlaceIQ? We essentially, this first layer, if you talk about location, you have to define what you mean by location. So location for us, we go down currently to this tile structure, and every single tile is about the size of a small city block, 100 meters by 100 meters. So imagine throwing a grid across the US of these tiles. There's about 1 billion tiles in the US, and that's how we organize location right now. And then you step up and we ingest huge amounts of location data. And we've done this for a long time, and we came from a company doing this previously, so we have a kind of a head start here. I think we're somewhere north of 500 billion data points, which is some ridiculously unfathomable number, but lots and lots of different data sets, right? So existing old data, right? Demographic, census, where the traffic travel, but now all of this new data, mobile data, social data, what photos are people taking, what devices are they using, what coupons are they redeeming, what are they talking about on Twitter, what's their social activity, what can we glean from the exhaust of mobile advertising. There's so much data, and one of these common parts is so much of it now is about location. So much of it is created from a location. So much of it is describing the attributes of a location. And we even create data ourselves now. We create the physical building outlines of big retailers, of automobile lots, of recreation areas, because we need that really high fidelity data. And now, thirdly, on top, the thing that we do, we're not an aggregator of data. We take all this data and we make sense of it. We build audiences from it. And we don't do it just into some black box algorithm. We have an entire team of people, many of which, ironically, are anthropologists at heart, who think about what do all these data sets mean when I see them come together in this causality. And from that, we can extract audiences from location. So imagine we have a system to make sense of the world. Well, now, how do we apply this? Well, one of the ways we apply it is through mobile. Through mobile advertising is one of the prime ways we monetize. But for us, we're at heart a data and platform company making sense of audiences. One way you can apply that is through mobile. And mobile obviously gives you a great data set in, because all of you here have a smartphone, you're running around leaving these breadcrumbs, and now it is now increasingly privacy acceptable, if you will, to start to use that data in a respectful, anonymous way. So mobile for us is not just a great mechanism to monetize, it's an incredibly powerful connective tissue that connects consumers, third-party data, first-party data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very quick sort of primer that I think is important on the way we view the world. And then if you think about this construct then of taking mobile advertising, taking location, and using location as a way to understand the success of a campaign to in-store visits, we built this KPI last year. We were the first folks to bring this to market, called Place Visit Rate. And I'm going to step you through a case study, and at its heart is reasonably simple, the idea of saying, if we have connected, messaged a device, and we can see the location and time of that device, and we can see a unique identifier, does that device appear within the particular location we're interested in? Did your consumer come to your store, come to your car lot, et cetera? So that is place visit rate. And I'm going to talk you through a real case study. I'm anonymized. I've taken some decimal places off here, so it's not sort of customer data. But this is a real case study. We actually did this last year, Q4 of last year, with a big retailer. It's pretty interesting. So we're working with this big retailer Q3 of last year, and we're saying to them, look, why haven't you spent some serious money in mobile advertising? You know that's where the world is going. That's where people's eyeballs are going. And they said to us, perhaps unsurprisingly, we just don't know how to judge mobile because we still sell most of our stuff in a physical store, and we don't know what CTR means. We don't know what all these new KPIs. We just don't know how to judge it. So we said to them, as you'd imagine, what do you care about? What would make you be interested in spending some serious money in mobile? And they said, understanding mobile's ability to drive in-store visitation. If you can measure that for us, we're game on to spend some serious money with you. So obviously at that point, I was highly motivated to come up with a solution, and we went back and we built this thing called Place Visit Rate. And essentially, if you think of a campaign, right, we're going to, for the example of this case study, we set out to reach about 10 million consumers. It was about 11 markets over about 3 months. We're going to measure how many of these consumers that we targeted were driven in store, and then more interestingly, perhaps, to some of the crowd here, we're going to start to learn about these behaviors, these consumers, in a pretty interesting way. So if you imagine, a representation here of how this works, so we have all this data that allows us to understand the world, and now we can see, obviously, billions of ad requests with location per month. So imagine we are plugged into publishers, ad networks, exchanges, and there are so many people on their devices now. This is primarily using mobile application inventory when consumers on smartphones have opted in to share their location, and we see these locations with a mobile advertising opportunity, and for many of these, we now can say, based upon the current location of that device and our deep proprietary understanding of that location, or the historical location of that device and a behavioral profile, we can now say, these devices we wish to message. And we're showing a rich media mobile ad, which very interestingly can be key to real-time inventory in the store. We have an integration to a supplier that does that. So it's a heavily targeted piece of mobile advertising. But more interestingly, we now say, we see this device. We see a time, location, we see a unique identifier. Can we see this device open up and present itself within the physical location of interest here, in this particular example, the big box retail store? And simply, that ratio is place visit rate, right? The idea of I've messaged X number of devices, how many of those devices can we see again in a store? Now, clearly it is not an absolute measure. We're not trying to present it as, we're not trying to do any funky maths and say, well, we saw this many people and we think there's as many people we didn't see. We're saying it's a relative measure. It's real data. This is how many people you messaged. This is how many people we saw in store. And so real data, again, pulled some of the decimals off. So if you imagine here, this campaign, we actually were able to measure around about 4.5 million devices. We're able to see that the total PVR, the total place visit rate for these devices, was about 0.8%, so significantly higher than the CTR. So everybody who saw the ad, 0.8%, which was 35,000 consumers, were able to measure, ended up going into this store. And then very encouragingly, we said, well, let's look at the people who actually clicked the ad, as opposed to all the people who just saw the ad and clicked the ad. And if you just isolate the group that clicked the ad, you can see the place visit rate is significantly higher, about 40% higher. That's really encouraging. People who clicked the ad showed up with a great propensity than people who just viewed the ad. And then you can start to get really interesting, right? You can say, how far did these consumers travel? And I'll tell you more about this in a minute, but you could say, well, how many people saw an advertisement for retailer A, and then it ended up going to retailer B? So competitive PVR gets quite interesting. So this was, the client was extremely happy with this. This has been a great product for us we brought to market. And then you can start to imagine, well, okay, this is really interesting, Duncan, but how do I know that these people weren't going to this store anyhow? You could just be measuring consumer behavior here. That's the next logical thing. So we did construct, with this particular campaign, an A/B test. The idea of saying, look, we see all these devices. Some of them come to the store, some of them don't. Well, there's many, many other devices that we don't message, and they're just moving through time and space, and we're not altering their behavior in any way, shape, or form, or showing them advertisements. So how many of those devices end up going to this store? So imagine the A set is people who have actually seen the ad, and the B set is everybody else, randomized sample, the same size over the same time period. And you can imagine this was a really important customer for us, and they said, you got to do this A/B test. And I remember it was 2 o'clock in the morning the night before we were supposed to send this. And in all honesty, I had no idea if this was going to be flat, it's going to be up, it's going to be down. And it was a bit of a nail-biting moment. Literally about 2 o'clock, the figures came back, and it averaged out in the high 40 percentile. So what we're saying is, of the exposed group, again, real data, this is all actual devices, 4 million devices that saw this ad, 35,000 showed up in the store. Of the control, 4 million devices saw this ad, I mean, 20,000 showed up in the store. So we were able to show a pretty significant uplift here. So now's where it gets interesting, right? So great, okay, new KPI, worked pretty well. We can measure people coming into the store. But what kind of learnings can you get from this that start to really get this very interesting? Well, you can do some basic stuff. You can say, okay, when did people actually visit the store? Did they do it a month later? Did they do it a day later? And very encouragingly, you can see there's a very strong tilt here towards the first day or two after seeing the ad. Now you can start to say, so all of these people that actually converted through PVR, that came to the store, we can actually, we have these anonymous profiles on many of them. So we can start to tell the retailer, hey, we know who came to your store. We can tell you their demographics. We can tell you the types of vehicles they have registered. We can start to tell you their dining habits. We can start to tell you their shopping, because of course, if you think of these devices, we have behavioral profiles on them anonymously. It's opted in data to be able to understand their physical behavior. And we've seen those audiences come to that store now. So it gets really, really interesting. And you can imagine there's a tremendous amount of data here. And then we did another thing that I think is very relevant to the conversation that's going on here. We said, okay, so this is great, but what about if we try to understand consumer behavior just before they came to the store? Because that was a really interesting thing to figure out. Why do people come to a retailer? What are they doing? Are they shopping at competitive retailers? Are they shopping nearby? Are they coming direct from home? Because if you can understand the physical mode and behavior that these consumers show up with, you should be able to treat them better, understand how to optimize end caps, on all sorts of data that becomes very interesting. So we built this KPI called pre-visit. So imagine we see all these devices in a store. For a pretty good number of them, we can isolate, hey, where were they before they came to this store? Again, no need to go down to individual level. This is aggregate data, so anonymized. It's pretty interesting. So this was actually for a different campaign for a retailer, and we could start to say, what mode were these devices in before they visited your store? And you can see here, they were QSR dining and casual dining. They were doing some clothes shopping, some home shopping. You could start to understand, where were they? Because if I all know they were dining beforehand, then I might want to message them in a very, very specific way. And I might want to drive them in store with offers. I might want to behave to them differently in store. We did this for a couple of brands, looking at other brands. So we looked at Walmart. Let's look at all the Walmarts the last 60 days. Where was everybody before they came to a Walmart? Now, this is an index of other retailers. And I'm not a retail expert, but I looked at this and I said, Sam's Club, why would everybody be, and somebody who was in retail said, well, that's actually a pretty common behavior, right? People go to Sam's Club for a lot of the huge discount stuff, then they go to Walmart for the groceries, and so pretty interesting. You see people in Walmart shopping mode, Lowe's, PetSmart, Kohl's, so a pretty interesting set of behaviors. We did the same for Best Buy. It's pretty interesting, a separate set of behaviors. So you see here, right, you're looking at Sports Authority, PetSmart, Dick's Sporting Goods. I mean, that's a shopping trip I could even get into, right? You go to the sports store, you go look at some tropical fish, you go to the sporting goods stores, and you go and buy some electronics. Sounds like a pretty interesting set of behaviors. So you start to think about that. That's a pretty specific set of behaviors. People were coming from these other retailers. And again, this is an index. It's obviously not absolute numbers, but it's really, really, really revealing. And then we went one step further and we said, let's look at some really just fun examples. The Apple Store and McDonald's. Now, we probably could have come up with a much better example. So we did this a couple months ago. We looked at the last 60 days, and we looked at McDonald's locations and Apple Store locations that we could accurately isolate. So these weren't ones in incredibly built-up areas. And then we said, let's look at all the devices there and start to look at the behaviors of those devices. And we can start to see, unsurprisingly, that Apple Store attendees, they typically have multi-unit dwellings, right? No great surprise. They live in apartment buildings. We can see household size. Guess what? Single people go to the Apple Store more than other people in an index. Look at large households. They typically over-index for McDonald's. And I won't step you through all of this, but it's pretty obvious stuff, right? It's what wealthy people frequent the Apple Store more than McDonald's as an index. But it's not incredibly compelling new data, but it starts to show you the breadth of understanding and analytics and data exhaust that you can start to get from mobile data and mobile advertising. And then you start to think about, okay, well, you've got this entire ecosystem of understanding consumers and behavior data. How does this affect this construct of indoor marketing, of indoor location? So simplistically, I think about this as, if you think of, there's many ways you can represent this, the purchase funnel per se. You've got awareness, consideration, and point of purchase, and you've obviously got, indoor marketing this is where it all ends, right? For much of the world now, the bottom of this funnel, this indoor marketing, this store location, it's incredibly important. And I now think about, well, if you've got the rest of this funnel, right? So you've got awareness, you've got people watching TV at home, and they are now they're seeing advertisements for your brand and product. You've got retail purchase history. So you've got companies like Datalogix and Nielsen Catalina and dunnhumby that allow you to take all this retail purchase data and be able to put it against an individual. Now you've got this construct of, well, maybe these consumers are using their laptops as well, and maybe these consumers are viewing a mobile circular. These are all interactions that occur before this magic moment of indoor marketing, a point of purchase, and yet they're kind of siloed away right now. And these produce, tremendous amounts of data. So if you could start to take all of this data here, and you could now start to say, hey, indoor marketing, indoor location, this is the final piece, but it shouldn't exist as a silo. It should exist as the ultimate culmination of this consumer journey. And we're going to talk about this on the panel, but the idea of just saying, indoor location, I want to treat it separately, I want to target these people, I'm going to cross-sell them, upsell them. What about this other massive industry there that has been thinking about this, that's been influencing these customers, hopefully intelligently? If we can connect this data up, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. So finally, I don't have any great epiphany here, but I think if you could really start to understand the consumer journey, so what was a consumer doing before they visited my store? And I'll just continue to use a retail example because it's a simple one, right? What advertisement are they being exposed to? What products do they buy? What products have they opted in to show an interest in? And you could take all of this data, and now you could pass this intelligence to an indoor marketing or location system to say, I know you clicked on this ad 17 hours ago that I intelligently targeted to you, so now my indoor location navigation system is going to suggest to take you to that aisle. I know that you typically buy this product, so I'm going to suggest a cross-sell or an upsell to you. I think that's when this ecosystem gets really, really interesting, when you can start to meld together the consumer journey, all of the data and advertising and touch points, and connect this to the ultimate culmination, which is this indoor marketing and indoor positioning. So with that, I think I'll stop at that point, but love to hear any questions or comments.